So, today we're going to deconstruct one of the most fascinating figures out there, the rake. But, this isn't going to be some stuffy literary analysis. Oh no. We're going to treat the rake as a kind of psychological protocol. A surprisingly effective and, repeatable process for seduction. Let's break down exactly how it works.
The entire power of the rake, all of it, stems from this one single incredibly powerful idea. He is the living embodiment of a potent female fantasy. We're talking about a man who is utterly enslaved by his love for women, a man who is willing to go to any length for his desire. And that right there, that's the absolute key to his irresistible allure.
So, here's the big question. What if this seemingly chaotic, passionate, magnetic pull isn't some kind of magic? What if it's actually a method, a formula? Well, that's exactly what we're here to figure out. We're going to pull this fantasy apart piece by piece and break down the rake's protocol into a step-by-step psychological process.
All right, so here's our roadmap for this. First, we'll dive into the core fantasy itself. Then, we're going to look at the crucial prep work, building a reputation and using hypnotic language. After that, it's showtime, the active performance of passion. And finally, we'll expose the endgame, a very clever psychological trap.
Okay, so what is this seductive fantasy we keep talking about? At its heart, it's the idea of a man who is a slave to his love of women. Now, this isn't about finding a wife or settling down. No. This is all about the relentless, all-consuming pursuit of desire. And that single-minded focus is the very foundation of his appeal. So, let's get into how this fantasy is actually built. The first two phases are really all about preparation. You have to think of this as the essential groundwork the rake lays before the real performance of seduction even kicks off.
The whole strategy really rests on two main pillars. First, he has to build a very specific and, notorious public image. Then, he masters a type of language that's less about sharing information and way more about, casting a spell.
You see, the rake's work starts way before he even meets his target. It's all about perception management. He doesn't run from his bad name. He embraces it, he cultivates it, and he turns it into his own personal brand.
And the psychology behind this is just fascinating. So the action is pretty simple. Make sure everyone knows about your conquests. But the effect? It creates competitive desire. The target starts to think, wow, if so many women want him, then being chosen by him must mean I'm uniquely desirable. All of a sudden, the seduction becomes a kind of validation of her own worth.
Okay, so his reputation is set. What's his next tool? Language. But for the rake, words aren't for logic or reason. Their purpose is purely emotional. It's all about insinuation, flattery, and ultimately a kind of hypnosis.
And here's how that works. The rake uses this custom-tailored flattery, and he delivers it with a kind of musical rhythm to create what's described as a narcotic effect. The target stops analyzing what he's saying and starts focusing only on the incredible feeling his words produce, as if her very soul is being lifted up.
All right, with that foundation firmly in place, we now move into the active phases. This is the main event. This is where the rake puts on his incredible performance of overwhelming, seemingly uncontrollable passion.
Now this is the core deception right here. The rake appears weak, like he is completely overcome by his desire for his target. He seems to have lost all control. But get this apparent weakness is his most calculated strategy. It completely distracts his target. She sees a man enslaved by her charm, which makes her feel powerful, in control, and most importantly, safe.
The rake offers an escape from the civilizing role that society often puts on women. He's offering the polar opposite of stability, a thrilling, purely sensual moment that's completely detached from the past or the future. It's an escape into the now.
For the rake, obstacles aren't things to be avoided. They're tools to be used, or even created. Seeking out a little danger creates this incredible sense of liberation. A forbidden, taboo affair. It taps into that deep, often unspoken, yearning for freedom from the rules of everyday life.
And now we've arrived at the final, and maybe the most powerful phase in the rake's entire protocol. This is his psychological endgame. It's a maneuver that locks everything in by completely reframing the entire dynamic.
So here's how it plays out. When his bad boy behavior is finally called out, the rake claims weakness. He'll say something like, I want to change, I really do, but I just can't. And this is brilliant, because it triggers the target's desire to reform him.
All of a sudden, her own desire for him gets disguised under this noble, virtuous cause of saving him.
You know, to really tie all of this together, it helps to think of the rake as a kind of controlled forest fire. You know it's dangerous, of course you do, but you can't help but be absolutely mesmerized by the intense heat and the brilliant light it gives off.
So after deconstructing this whole protocol, we're left with one last question. Is the rake just the embodiment of a fantasy for freedom and intensity? Or is he a master practitioner of a highly calculated psychological formula? You know, the most fascinating thing might just be that, according to this protocol, he could be both at the exact same time.
That's all for today. Download the full Rake PDF